Awesome. I think we've got everyone, and since everyone's time is really valuable, we're going to get started on time. So I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. Today, Sue Walworth is going to be talking about smart rules and events. So we're really excited about this. Sue has been writing a lot of the smart rules for our clients along the way and has put together an amazing library here of smart rules and has just a wealth of knowledge. So we're really excited to have her do the presentation today. Just a couple quick rules before we get started. The presentation probably is going to be closer to 45 minutes instead of 30 minutes. Sue's just got a wealth of information in today's meeting, so we're excited about that. The phone lines are muted, so I'm going to be monitoring the questions feature within here. So if you have any questions, just put them into the questions feature. I will be monitoring those. And if there's some really good ones, I will be interrupting Sue to make sure that she can ask those along the way. And then last but not least, if you want to copy this PowerPoint presentation, just put your email address in here and I'll send you out the PowerPoint. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sue and let her go through everything. Oh, and last thing on this sheet here, I'll just hit this one. We have a couple other webinars coming up. In our email, you should have seen those tips and tricks for Sage Intacct, credit card processing. I left off here year-end processing, but in the email, you would have gotten the year-end processing one. And then last but not least, just a quick reminder that the R4 release is going to be released in November 11th. It's on a Friday. And it will be, so basically right around 2 months from now. Also, next month is Sage Transform, so anyone who is interested in attending a customer and user conference in Orlando for Sage Intacct, please let us know. I can get you some information on that. It is a really great 3-day event to learning more about Sage Intacct and all its features. So with that, I will now officially turn it over to Sue, and Sue, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Hi, so wanted to share a little information about smart rules with people today. It's something that I don't know that we always think about, but smart rules in Intacct are very powerful. And what does a smart rule allow us to do? It allows us to validate data to ensure that we're entering accurate information before we save, or in some cases, delete a record. Few things to know that you cannot do with a smart rule. These go into smart events, which we're not necessarily covering, but we'll on another time, is that you cannot use a smart rule to change a record that already exists, and you cannot use a smart rule to change data before saving the record. Currently, the error messages that you will get from a smart rule are a work in progress. We've got a little bit of a customizable location in there so you can put a statement, but they're not the prettiest, but their functionality is first and foremost. User requirements to write a smart rule, you need to be a full or limited admin user, so a business user, and you must have access to customization or platform services to be able to write these smart rules, but they would apply for any user who is entering information. And just a quick note, when you put a smart rule in place, one of the things that is often forgotten or overlooked is that when you use an import, if you have a warning in place with a smart rule, it will stop your import for that record. So because you cannot hit enter to continue through an import, you will get an error. So again, a smart rule is out there to allow us to validate what our team is entering. And this can be in many different locations within the system. How they work is the rule identifies what would you consider the bad data. So you write something that is going to tell Intacct what is bad, and then Intacct is going to prevent a certain action on that. One of the things that's kind of a cool trick that I've learned is if you are fighting with writing a rule and it's not returning what you want, you can use the exclamation point and the equal sign to flip it exactly the opposite. So we'll go over some other tips, but again, we're trying to identify the bad data. So True means the condition is met. Intacct then takes that condition, which may include injections in the form of, what are you having Intacct review? So the injection is going to be, what fields are you looking at with that rule? Intacct then applies that to certain events, which we will talk a little bit more about, but there has to be an event to cause a SMART rule to be reviewed. The SMART rule will then, in the case where it sees that the data is bad, it can produce either a warning, which means you can enter to proceed through that warning, or an error or a hard stop, meaning you must fix that data before you continue with your action. So just an example of what I meant about how these look. These are not very fancy screens, but they are certainly serve their purpose. So you can see an error up here. And again, it is a hard stop. You cannot save, edit, or delete that record before you fix whatever it is hollering about. Whereas with a warning, you will get this yellow box across the top of your screen. And with a warning, you can click either save, or in some cases post or delete to continue through the warning. So one is the complete prevention of anything happening. The other is more of a, hey, do you really want to do this before you continue? And I mentioned that SMART rules apply to actions. So something has to be happening in the system for Intacct to look and apply the rule to. And the three things that can apply to are when you are adding a record. So when you create either a new record or you are converting a record. This does not go back and check something that is already in existence. So just by writing a SMART rule, it is not automatically going to apply to anything already in your system. It also applies to when you are, quote, setting. Most of us would call that editing a record. So anytime you are changing an existing record, the SMART rule will flow through. This does not check new records. Cases where you might want to have a set or an edit instead of an add is when you have something coming from another system. So we talked about imports or integrations. If you have your projects flowing in from another system, you wouldn't necessarily want to have a warning there to stop that. But you may say that the first time you go in and look at a record, you want to check and see that a certain field is completed. And in that instance, you would set that only to be on the edit or set functionality and not on the add. You can also have a SMART rule apply when you are deleting a record. Now, it sounds kind of funny. You can't really have a SMART rule warning on a delete these days. So it truly is going to either allow you or not allow you to delete a record. Conditions. SMART rules are based upon your conditions that you write. They can be very simple or very complex, but this is what Intacct is going to review to determine how to proceed. And conditions are composed of several different parts. I won't get into too much detail, but at the end of this slide, I do have to share with you something that I actually have a copy of at my desk that all of you may want to see, which is the customization cheat sheet from Intacct. And within there, it will go over these different things we're talking about, and you can have an easy reference for your little operators, your methods, writing your conditions, and even some examples of some standard SMART rules and SMART events. So we use these components to write our conditions. And as mentioned, there are things such as, I will make this a little bigger, but you might have the or functionality. So again, you may have a very, very simple rule that is just department must equal something, but you may also have the condition where you want to have department must be 100 and something else, or and something else. So the two lines would be your or function The ampersand are the and function. And as you can see, this goes down through lists of some of the other standard operators that you can use when you're writing these. I will note that these also will apply when you are writing smart events. So this is a handy sheet to have for both. Methods, it does also talk about pieces of information that you can pull out into that smart rule. So if you're looking at something and you want to validate certain characters within there, you could take your string function and just pull out a certain thing. So I may write a certain event or a certain smart rule that says I'm going to look at the first 3 characters on something, and if the first 3 characters match my condition, I want to make sure it is in a specific department. So these are things that you can use to kind of start building out your conditions to specify what you need in your environment. Injections, this is a long slide for a simple thing. This really means, what are you looking at? And this is very often going to be like your merge field. So what piece of information are we going to inspect? And this is some examples where you might have your AP bill, your invoice document, project, those types of things. The good news about injections within Intacct is that there is a bit of a helper, and I will do this on the example we have. I will show you where you can go and look up the fields that you can pull back from Intacct based upon what object you're looking at. Before you begin writing your smart rules, there are some things that it's helpful to think through. One of the things that I like to do is actually draft out on a piece of paper what is true and what is false, almost like a little logical chain. So if this is true, where do I go? If this is false, where do I go? And you can start layering things on. So look at your system. What are your requirements? And where can you logically say, this is really a decision tree. In this instance, it's going one way, and in this instance, it's going another, and it's always going to be that way. So if you only wish to have a certain type of transaction entered into a certain department, building in what we mentioned before, you would use the 2 equal signs. You would say your department must always be equal, and then your literal 200 for your department. So mapping out the conditions can be helpful, and then you can actually draft up your condition through your requirement tree and piece it together. Determine which object you're working from to do this, and whether it should be an error or just a warning, right? So if you are simply saying, in the rare instance, this is okay, you might want a warning message. So your warning may be something to the effect of, please note, when entering a credit card charge, you should have a project listed. If you know in your instance that there's times when that's okay, then you allow the warning, the user can enter through. If it is never acceptable, then you would want the error. Consider the users. The goal of a smart rule is not to frustrate the people who are entering the transactions, but to guide them and to ensure that we are not spending hours chasing down mistakes later on. So when you're thinking about writing a smart rule, try and put yourself in the user's shoes. Is this clear? Is it logical? And also use these with your training. Use them as a tool. Make sure your team understands why these smart rules are in place as well, so that there isn't frustration. The goal is not to necessarily trigger the smart rule, but the goal is to train your employees and your team members to enter the information accurately. And we recommend that when you're writing new smart rules, that you create and test them in an IMP or sandbox environment. one of the things you'll see as we look at writing these is the condition has to always evaluate to true. And sometimes when you're trying to write a SMART rule, you can't think of every condition that might be true because you're so focused on the condition we do not want to have happen. So I have found that by putting this in an IMP environment, I can test random transactions, and my goal is to try to trip it up and try and make it happen where I don't expect it to. This way it doesn't stop your users, and you know that you're reasonably confident it will have the intention of just preventing the error and not requiring people to holler at you to remove it. So again, test, test, test before you put things in live. Intacct has a SMART rule wizard that we will look at, and it will take you through 4 steps. You will first choose the object that you wish to impact. So where are you coming at this transaction from? What are you doing when you are putting the information into the system? Are you adding a project? Are you entering an AP bill? What object is this? And again, you will be able to pull up a list within the system. Determine if you want a warning or an error. Select the action that should trigger the SMART rule, again, the add, the set or edit, or the delete, and then create your condition. Again, remembering the SMART rule should specify when your transaction is good. So if you didn't write a condition, it would always be good. You would never have an error or warning. As long as the condition equals true, it posts. I thought I'd show an example of something that is a little bit unique in that we're using a flexible date range. So we're able to say, let's relate this to today's date. If I enter an AR payment and I enter a receipt date and a post date that don't make sense with each other, I want to see it now. And for me, this made sense because I've accidentally entered a cash payment with a receipt date with the wrong year on it. I mean, that's human error. It's logical. I could not think of an instance where this wouldn't make sense. So this was the example I thought we could start with. So your receipt date is more than 90 days in the future is where we're going to create an error message. Within Intacct, you're going to want to drive to your platform services or your customization services, and then to your SMART rules. So in here, in my instance, I have platform services. I'm going over to all, and I'm going to create a new SMART rule. You will notice that when I click on the down arrow here, when it talks about the object to extend, it will give me a list of the objects that I can work with. And I can search within here if I need to by starting to type as elsewhere. I can start to type my A for AP. In this case, I am looking for, and I've already keyed it in, so I will come through here and find my piece of information, but key it in. I would go to my next, let me go back to here. So I would grab my accumulation or my object. This case, I want the AR payment, and I would go to the next screen. And the next screen, I'm going to set which options and when, which are going to be an error on add, set, done. So let me go back into live here. So I will show you here. Let me go back into this one. So if you look at my AR payment receipt, I chose my AR payment. I added in that I wanted an error, and I want it to be when I enter a new one, or even when I go in to look at one. So if I'm going to edit one and I make a mistake and I miskey the date, I want to see that in here. So then the next thing that I think is wonderful within Intacct is when you're doing these, you've got this field lookup option. So I'm going to just go down to a blank space in my condition, and I'm just going to look. So this is where Intacct will help you find the pieces of data that you can pull back and inspect. The nice thing about this as well is, again, you can use your Control F key to find something. So if I know I'm looking for some sort of date functionality, I can search. And if it's not within here, I can expand. So you can use the layering function within to open and find what you need. So you will be able to see, as you're writing, everything that you can look at and pull back in as the merge field. As you can see, there are a lot of different pieces of information. So again, I use my Control F. For me, in this case, I wanted a receipt date, so I had selected that. But you could select several. If you're not sure what you want to do, pull back a couple pieces of information. And what you'll see is it's just going to enter it into your box here so that you can then decide what you want to use. For this example, I was using the AR payment receipt date. Needs to be within 90 days of the day. So I would literally just take a little piece of my snip here and cut it out, put it in here, put my formula in, and then get rid of this excess without ever having to know how to type the details behind it. I was able to get what I needed back out and then put a message in here that's going to make some sense to the user. So in this case, I'm saying your receipt date is greater than 90 days from today. Do you really want to do that? And then it's going to ask you for a name, some sort of description. So in the future, should your next team member join and they're looking at this, they may understand why you wrote this smart rule. And then you would actually go ahead and save. So that's all there is to putting a smart rule in place. You are looking at your object, your instances, you're able to look up your merge fields and you give it a name. So then for here, to kind of show you, this is my demo environment. I only have a handful, but I will say that at Ethos, one of the things that I found super helpful is we share a list of smart rules that we found useful. So we have them for things like validating a date. You can also have them for ensuring that you have a field filled in on a project. For instance, if you have a project that you did not put a begin date on, you may want to have a warning there. So again, these are lists that you can have and you can inactivate these at any time. So say you know you're doing a project where you're populating a certain subset of data, and you know that in that subset you need a very specific criteria, you can then later go and inactivate that, but keep it in your instance. So one of the things we mentioned is in these, I've got them all active, but it's very, very simple to take one of these views and you go to the last page where you would normally save. And just like with any other object within Intacct, you can inactivate it so that it currently does not impact you. So you can use these and then turn them off if you only need them for, like I said, if you're doing a project where data validation, I can't say those two words, where data validation is key, build a rule or two or three and use them while you're doing that project and then turn them off. But you're at least ensuring that you're not later coming back and searching for information. So as I mentioned, you're now seeing, here's the entry of this. So within any of these, I showed you that the error message is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be one of two things. It's going to be your little box and it's going to give your little snip. It's going to say which rule you have violated, or it's going to say the same thing, your little snip on the warning, and then you will enter through. I think, again, the thing to keep in mind is I was going to show you, so these were the screens I went through, and I'm not going to walk you through them again, but again, just entering, you're able to search for things. So now what's going to happen is, in a perfect world, I'm going to go and I'm going to test my transaction, as I mentioned. So rather than just putting it in live, I'll test it in an imp environment and copy it into a live environment later. Show you what this looks like. So for this instance, I mentioned it's an AR payment receipt. Again, we're kind of building in a little bit of a dynamic rule in this case, where we're not having to say it's only in this date or that date, but we're actually based it on today. So to show you what that looks like, if I'm going into AR and I'm receiving a payment, and I'm just going to grab an example here and show you what we look like. And again, this could be used, you know, again, on a number of different objects or different scenarios. You can have an entry date that you're checking against a certain date range. A number of options and ways to go about things. But this one is meant to specifically holler at me if I go, you know, my payment date is 9/8/23. So if I try and post this, and I actually select my invoice, we'll put it on this guy. There. All right. Why am I having one of those? I apologize, guys. Let's see. That's one of those days. All right. That's a bad example. I apologize. Let me show you a different example because, as we all know, payments are fun, and I've obviously paid that invoice that I was planning on using. I'm just going to back up here. Let me look. Let's see. Project date. Let's do location. Let me go back and walk you through some other ones, and I'll pull them up. I'll pull up a different environment while this is happening. So again, and I apologize for that. What it's going to do in that instance is it's going to use a condition to perform some sort of validation. So I'm not going to be spending a month down the road trying to figure out where did my payment disappear? Why do I have one report with one date and another one with another date? Testing is why you would have to do what I did here. And I would see that, again, I don't have a payment to apply it to, but this is why you would test as well. Because what I've seen in some of these instances is I can think of one instance where something might pass. But if you write a rule that has several layers of conditions, you may not think of a time when it should pass, but it doesn't. So that's why I wanted to show you a couple other examples of things to think through. One of the things we see in a system is that you have so many different users, and we try and be great about limiting access and locking things down. We're doing our day-to-day, and we enter a new customer at the entity level. And oh no, we've just done this. We should have created that at the top level, because now we cannot see that everywhere we need to. We can't see that among our other entities. So you can, again, because it's something where you can state very clearly when a rule should or should not allow something to pass, you can write a smart rule to stop somebody from entering a customer at an entity level so that you always create it at the top level and can access it for your reporting as anticipated. So again, looking at what is your object, when do we want this rule to apply? For me, I'm only worrying about adding a new customer. There's an example of what you would use and pull back as the field and your error message. Again, fairly straightforward on that one, but something like this next one, I think, might be a little more interesting when we talk about things such as project reporting or wanting to ensure that my big picture P&L agrees to my project P&L on a detailed manner. So when you're creating, for instance, a credit card transaction, you may not always expect to see a project on the line, but when you do, you may want to have an item and additional detail. So this example has put together a couple of instances where I've had a credit card transaction entered, there's been a project ID, but there's no item assigned. So I go to run my by item expense report, and lo and behold, it makes no sense. Something we'll talk about with you when we're doing implementations is best practices around using dimensions. But when you write a report, based upon a dimension in Intacct. If you do not include that dimension on a transaction, it will potentially break the reporting later on. So trying to use a dimensional report with no dimension is painful. So we can set a smart rule that would say, if it's a credit card transaction, there's a project, I want to ensure that we put this information in and that there's an item. And I can further make this intelligent by saying, I'm really only concerned because I evaluate my project expenses by using the items that's associated. So we can use a layered or more complex example to ensure that when a team member enters a credit card transaction and a project, they actually include the appropriate information for our reporting to work. So we've written one here to allow for that. So this, if somebody wanted to, you can feel free to cut and paste this into your system. These are, again, very straightforward, non-custom fields. In this instance, what I was looking at was, what is my P&L account range, which is going to be 4,000 and greater. And when do I need my item to be on that entry line? When I have a project.
Hey, Sue, one of the questions that came in, do we have like, do we have like kind of a list of like ones we can publish at the end to them, like examples of smart rules that we?
Yeah, we do actually. I've only got a handful in here, but I can certainly share a list with people who are interested. We have, one of the things that's interesting is a lot are based on custom field, but we have between 20 and 40 that do not have custom fields. So we can certainly share that.
Awesome.
And again, in your instance, just remember that your account range may be different, right? So you may need to tweak that. And that's why the testing is so important. But yeah, so we have this one, which I think might be helpful with a credit card transaction. I do have an example that I can share some of these with the team, certainly. And this is something that your consultant could share with you as well if you want to reach out and walk through writing new ones. So here are some of the other ones that I just want people to be aware of that might help as you're doing your day-to-day entry and as you're reviewing your reports and wondering why your numbers aren't where you expect. You can require your master data to be created at a certain level. So that's your customer at the top level, your vendor at the top level, likely your project at your entity level. You can require a specific field to be completed on a record. Places where this is used often that I see are on a project. You want to make sure you have a manager assigned. You need a start date to be able to book an estimate. So you need to have these fields completed. Project contract lines, the newest functionality, one of the new functionalities, the AIA billing. You've got to make sure that your contract lines are marked as billable. So these are some very simple rules to put in place to ensure that these don't break. As well, cash receipts, you can use the functionality. Again, other things to lock down, we mentioned the credit card, expiration dates, purchase orders being quantity versus price. So again, in your workflows, you can also use these. And you can apply smart rules to document types. So if you say you want to apply it to something in purchasing, you can say what transaction type within purchasing. It might apply to a subcontract, not a purchase order, or vice versa. And you can specify that. So what you will see in one of those instances is when you are in the system, if you're adding something to, and I'm just typing P to get to my list. So I'm typing in P, hitting there, finding what all my different P items are. And maybe I'm going to say purchase order. Yes, I want to look at my purchase order transaction. A document type pops up and it's going to give me my list in my environment. So then I say, I want this to be applicable to my purchase order and my purchase order for stock. So you will find, depending on what you choose as an object, your smart rule will flex. And also, as what you have as an object, your field lookup will flex. If you do not see a field in this list, so if you go into your field lookup and you do not find a field, that means that right now it is not exposed and you cannot write a smart rule on it. What I found is super helpful is to have an example of a document type open. So if I'm going to be looking at this transaction type of a purchase order, I will typically pull up a purchase order on the screen next to me and look at the field name for what I want to write the rule on, so that when I'm now in the screen where I'm trying to find my field here, I have an idea where to start, and then I will use the functionality to start typing it. So again, little ways to kind of cheat the system. Look in here, there's some different pieces. Note again, you can use the drill down. So if you don't see it in here, however, you currently cannot use that in your smart rule. Or later, should you decide to write smart events, it will also not show there. One of the things that I want to mention, I know we're coming up on time and you've all been patient with me. There's a little bit of a trick or two that I wanted to kind of share with people that I found painfully over time. You know, I mentioned testing. Testing is important. And not only me testing it, but maybe having somebody who enters POs on a daily basis test theirs. If you have something that's not returning what you expect, you can always try and flip it using the not equal to sign. You can certainly, again, you can string smart rule conditions together using these connectors that are going to be on that sheet that I've shared the attachment to. This one I love. If you are troubleshooting a rule and you don't know what you're pulling back in your parameter, so you're asking it for a merge field, but you don't know why it's not working, take that parameter and look in your error message. So if I look here, I'm going to select my properties. If you can see here, I can take this information and I can paste it right into my error message. And then when the error message comes, I'm going to see what's wrong. So some error messages, you may want to put your line number in your string for the error. Or if you're troubleshooting, it's not working, take this entire string, take whichever thing you're not understanding. So you can take this here and temporarily put it in your condition for your error message. I'm sorry, put it in your error message feedback. And that way, the next time it pops up, you will have that information in front of you. So then you just take it off once you've finalized and determined you have things working. So be creative. I mean, you can alter these quite easily, and they can be packaged. So you can package up smart rules and ultimately smart events, just like you do with reports, and install them. So if you need to copy something from IMP back to live, and it's a very, very tricky rule to write, there are instructions on how to package that up, and then you can just simply add it as a custom package. Then the last thing to keep in mind is simply not overwhelming your users with smart rules, because then you have to maintain them all. So when you think about your conditions and you think about writing the hard stops and you're doing a P&L, be as broad as you can. If it's truly a P&L range, maybe you want to say 4,000 to 4,999 instead of, if you only have account 4,500 to 4,900, putting that in. Because the more you allow for growth, the fewer times you'll have to touch it. So this cheat sheet, here's the link to get to this cheat sheet. I will nicely package up a list of some sample smart rules, as well as this cheat sheet. And if you let Stuart know that you'd like a copy, we can share some of those with you. And feel free to ask your consultant about it too. Again, you can put these in place temporarily if you need for data entry projects, or if you're getting ready to go live and you have certain things that you're loading up, you could put a smart rule in place and remove it or inactivate it when you're done. But use these to your advantage to keep you from having to search later to find out why something isn't how you expected. And that's pretty much what I've got. Does anybody else have any questions other than, if you want me to share the rules, again, mentions of Stuart, I will share some with you. But use this document heavily and, have fun with it. Know that it's meant to save you time.
Awesome. Great job, Sue. So please, if you want a copy of the customization services, we can send that over to you. You can obviously click on the link as well. Just go out to developer.intacct.com. Any of our lists, we can package that up and send that over to you. Again, make sure that, and I'll attest to one thing that Sue said throughout this whole thing, which is, work with your consultant, making sure that these are tested correctly. B, make sure you're in your IMP environment, which is really important. And for those who don't know what the IMP environment is, that's a copy that you get of Sage Intacct during the implementation phase. There's no charge for you for that. So if you don't have it, you should all have it. Once you get your base set up, that's something that your consultant usually will make a copy of. It takes a couple of days for Sage to make a copy, and then it's a separate installation. After you go live, that is turned off by Sage after 30 days of go live. But always feel that's a great way of testing out these features. After you go live, and if you want to play around with these, you can always go into you can always get a sandbox. There's a charge for that. We always recommend our clients to get the sandbox after they go live. There's no reason to buy it while you're in the implementation phase because you have the IMP environment. So with that, I will leave. If there's any other questions, please feel free to put them into the questions chat or the questions feature within the GoToWebinar. We'll stay on the phone for a few more minutes, but otherwise, really appreciate everyone staying on today and learning about smart rules. And hopefully you guys can use these for your environment and help you take Intacct to the next level. Have a great day.